I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom holding my father's watch. The one Linda said he gave to his poker buddy George. The one George told me he never received. The room is empty now, walls bare except for rectangles of darker paint where Mom's landscapes used to hang. The ones Linda said were worthless reproductions. The ones I watched her brother-in-law load into a truck 3 weeks ago. I've known for 6 months that my stepmother is stealing my inheritance. Known it the way you know you're getting sick, that creeping certainty you keep denying because acknowledging it means doing something about it. And doing something about it terrifies me more than losing everything. I'm 41 years old, high school art teacher, divorced because I let my ex-husband make every decision until he decided to leave. I've spent my entire life avoiding confrontation, like it's a communicable disease. Linda knows this about me. She's been counting on it. My father died 6 months ago and left everything split, 50-50, between me and my brother Marcus. Simple, clear, fair. Except Linda is the executor, and Linda has been making things disappear. Small items first, books, jewelry, collectibles, then bigger things. Dad's vintage car, his furniture, Mom's paintings, now the house itself. My childhood home, listed for sale without asking Marcus or me, worth $680,000. Linda told Marcus it's worth $400,000. Here's what nobody tells you about being conflict-averse. You don't just avoid confrontation. You avoid it until the thing you're afraid to fight for is already gone. I'd spent 6 months watching my inheritance disappear because I was too scared to call my stepmother a thief. Turns out, fear has a price tag. This is how I finally found the courage to fight back, and how I learned that winning sometimes costs more than losing. Welcome to Echoing Stories, where every action echoes back. Where are you watching from? Drop your comment and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you about the kind of person I was. I'm still figuring out the tense. I teach art at the same high school I attended 25 years ago. Same classroom, same storage closet that still smells like turpentine and teenage anxiety. I'm the teacher students ask for deadline extensions because they know I'll say yes. The one who takes cafeteria duty no one else wants. The one who hasn't updated her curriculum in 5 years because change requires advocating for myself to the department head. And I'd rather just keep using the old lesson plans. My ex-husband used to joke that I'd apologize to a door if I walked into it. He stopped joking about it around year 7 of our marriage. By year 9, he'd moved in with his dental hygienist and I'd signed whatever papers his lawyer put in front of me, including the ones giving him the furniture I actually wanted. Confrontation seemed worse than losing a couch. This is relevant because it explains why Linda picked me as the easy target. My father married Linda 3 years before he died. Quick courtship. They met when she sold him an investment property, married 6 months later. I was 38 and still processing my mother's death 5 years earlier. Dad seemed happy. Linda seemed fine. Not warm exactly, but fine. My brother Marcus liked her. Marcus is 3 years older, works in software, lives 2 states away with his wife and 2 kids. Marcus is the kind of person who makes decisions quickly and never second-guesses them. He thought Linda was practical and low maintenance. He appreciated that she didn't try to replace Mom or make things weird. I never liked her, but I never said so. Linda had a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was taking up too much space, like my presence was somehow inconvenient. She'd rearrange things when she came to family dinners, move the chairs, adjust the table settings, reorganize Dad's kitchen. Small territorial claims. Dad didn't notice. Marcus didn't care. I noticed everything and said nothing. Dad died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning. Sudden, massive, gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 68 and had just retired from teaching. High school history, same district where I work. We'd planned to spend more time together. We'd planned a lot of things. His will was straightforward. Everything split 50-50 between Marcus and me. The house, the savings, the investment accounts, his collections. Linda got to stay in the house as long as she wanted, but ownership was ours. Dad had been fair to everyone. He'd named Linda as executor because it seemed practical. She was his wife. She knew his finances, and Marcus and I both had busy lives. At the funeral, Linda assured us she'd handle everything properly, make it easy on us during a difficult time. We were grateful. The stealing started small. A week after the funeral, I went to the house to get some of Mom's paintings Dad had stored in the attic. Linda told me Dad's poker buddies had come by and she'd given them his watch collection as mementos. 4 vintage watches worth about $30,000 total. I felt sick but said nothing. Maybe Dad had promised them. Maybe I was being materialistic during grief. A month later, Dad's rare book collection disappeared. First editions, signed copies, books he'd collected for 40 years. Linda said she'd donated them to the library in Dad's name. Beautiful gesture. Except I called the library. They'd received 3 books. Dad had owned over 200. 2 months after the funeral, I asked about Mom's jewelry. The pieces Dad had kept after Mom died. Her engagement ring, her grandmother's pearls, the Art Deco bracelet I'd loved since childhood. Linda said Dad had promised them to her. Put them in writing during their marriage. No, she didn't have the documentation handy, but surely I wasn't going to accuse my grieving stepmother of lying. I wasn't. I went home and cried into my pillow like I was 14. 4 months in, Dad's vintage car vanished from the garage. A 1967 Mustang he'd restored himself. Linda said she'd sold it to pay estate taxes. Got $12,000 for it. I looked up estate tax thresholds that night. Dad's estate was nowhere near large enough to trigger federal taxes. I didn't say anything to Linda. I mentioned it to Marcus. Marcus told me I was overthinking things. Estate management was complicated. Linda knew what she was doing. Was I really going to make grief harder by questioning every decision? I let it go. This is what I did. This is who I was. 6 months after Dad died, I drove past the house like I did every week. Couldn't help myself. Just wanted to see it, remember him, feel close to something. The for sale sign stopped me like a physical barrier. I sat in my car staring at that sign for 30 minutes. The house wasn't supposed to be sold without Marcus and me deciding together. That was explicit in the will. We had the right to buy each other out or sell and split the proceeds. But it was our decision, not Linda's. I called Marcus with shaking hands, explained about the sign. Marcus said Linda had mentioned it last week. The estate needed liquidity to pay final debts. We'd get our share from the sale. I tried to explain this wasn't the plan, this wasn't what Dad wanted. Marcus sighed the way he used to when I was being overly sensitive as a kid. He said Linda knew estate law. I was being emotional. It was just a house. I needed to let go. His kids were screaming something in the background. He had to go. I sat in my car after he hung up, staring at my childhood bedroom window. The window where I'd sat doing homework, where I'd painted my first terrible landscape, where Dad had talked me through my divorce, telling me I was stronger than I thought. I had 2 choices. Trust that Marcus was right and Linda was handling everything properly, or do the thing that had terrified me my entire life. I drove to the county clerk's office. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, but I went inside anyway. The county clerk was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the patient demeanor of someone who'd explained public records laws 1,000 times. I asked for estate documents related to my father's probate. My voice only shook a little. She pulled the files without judgment. 15 minutes later, I was sitting at a scratched wooden table in a fluorescent-lit room, looking at documents that confirmed everything I'd been too afraid to believe. Linda had listed the house for sale 2 weeks ago. The appraisal was right there in black and white, $680,000. She'd told Marcus $400,000. A $280,000 lie, casual as commenting on the weather. The estate debts totaled $45,000. Funeral costs, final medical bills, credit card balances. Nothing requiring the sale of a house. nothing justifying the liquidation of Dad's entire life. There were receipts for items listed as estate property sold to satisfy debts, Dad's book collection sold for $800 to an unnamed buyer, his watch collection, no receipt at all, just a note saying, distributed to deceased's friends per his wishes. The vintage car sold for $12,000 with a bill of sale to someone named Robert Martins. I photographed everything with my phone. My hands were shaking so badly the first few pictures came out blurred. I had to steady my wrists against the table. The clerk asked if I needed copies. I said yes, please, and tried not to cry while she ran them through the machine. I knew I needed help. A lawyer was the obvious choice, but my teacher salary barely covered my apartment and student loans from a graduate degree I'd never finished. The divorce had cleaned out what little savings I'd had. I couldn't afford legal representation. Instead, I called George. George had been Dad's friend for 30 years. Poker buddy, fishing companion, the guy Dad called when he needed help fixing something. Linda had claimed she gave him Dad's watch collection. If that was true, George would tell me. If it was a lie, I'd know Linda's pattern. We met at a coffee shop downtown. George was 72, retired electrician, still built like someone who'd worked with his hands his whole life. He gave me a hug that made my throat tight. I asked him carefully about the watches, apologized for bothering him with estate questions. George looked confused. He said Linda had never contacted him after the funeral, never offered him anything of Dad's. He'd actually hoped for one small memento. Didn't have to be valuable, just something to remember his friend. But Linda had never reached out. My stomach dropped into my shoes. George saw my face change, asked what was wrong. I explained everything, the missing items, the inflated debts, the house being sold without permission, the lies about where things had gone. My voice shook, but I got through it. George's expression shifted from concern to anger. He said he'd testify if I needed him to. Said Dad would be furious about this. Dad had always worried Linda was too interested in his money. I'd never heard that before. George seemed surprised I didn't know. Apparently, Dad had confided things to George he'd never told his children. That Linda had pushed for control of his finances after they married, that she'd wanted to be added to all his accounts, that Dad had resisted, kept things separate, made sure the will protected his kids. Dad had known, had tried to protect us, and Linda had waited until he died to take everything anyway. I needed to see inside the house. I still had my key, had never thought to give it back to Linda. Saturday morning, I knew Linda played tennis at the country club from 9 to 11. She'd mentioned it at the funeral, how she was trying to maintain her routines despite her grief. I'd thought it was healthy at the time. Now I realized she'd been scheduling her theft. I let myself in through the front door at 9:15. The house smelled wrong. Not like Dad, like cleaning products and emptiness. The living room was stripped. Dad's leather furniture gone. Mom's paintings removed from the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the faded wallpaper. The bookshelf where he'd kept his collection, empty except for dust. I walked through every room taking photographs. The dining room where we'd had every holiday meal, table gone. Dad's study where he'd graded papers for 30 years. Desk gone. Filing cabinets gone. Even the rug gone. My old bedroom, the bed frame I'd slept in from age 7 to 18, gone. The basement was worst. Dad had built me a studio down there when I was 15 and announced I wanted to be an artist. Proper lighting, ventilation for paint fumes, shelves for supplies. He'd spent weeks on it. Now it was just concrete and memories. I found Linda's study on the second floor, the guest room she'd converted into her office. I shouldn't have gone in. I definitely shouldn't have opened her desk drawer, but I did. Shipping receipts, dozens of them. Items sent to a storage unit in Linda's name. Items shipped to her sister in Florida. Items delivered to auction houses in 3 different states. Dates ranging back 5 months. She'd started while we were all still crying at the funeral. I took photos of everything, was so focused on documenting evidence that I didn't hear the car in the driveway. Linda's voice came from downstairs. She was home early. Every instinct I had screamed run, hide, escape through a window, anything to avoid confrontation. Instead, I froze like a deer in headlights, shipping receipts still spread across her desk. Linda appeared in the doorway. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then her expression hardened into something cold and sharp. She asked what I thought I was doing. Her voice was quiet, controlled, terrifying. I stammered something about wanting to see the house one more time before it sold, about being sentimental, about not meaning to intrude. Linda said I should have asked permission. This was estate property now. I was trespassing. Something in me sparked, small and scared, but there. I mentioned the missing items, asked where everything had gone. Linda's face could have frozen nitrogen. She said she had full authority as executor to manage estate assets. Everything she'd done was legal and proper. I wouldn't understand the complexities of estate management. It wasn't my area of expertise. I heard myself mention the storage unit receipts. My voice was shaking, but I said it. Linda paused, just for a second, then pivoted smoothly. Those items were her personal property, gifts from Dad during their marriage. Nothing to do with the estate. Did I really want to accuse her of stealing gifts from her dead husband? I had no proof they weren't gifts. No documentation, no witnesses, just suspicion and circumstantial evidence. Linda's voice softened into something almost sympathetic. She said she understood this was hard for me. Losing a parent was traumatic. Grief made people irrational, made them see conspiracies where there were none. She'd been handling all the difficult estate tasks, so Marcus and I didn't have to deal with the stress. She was doing me a favor. Maybe I should talk to someone, a therapist, grief counseling. I felt it happening in real time, Linda reframing my accusations as symptoms of instability, making me doubt my own perceptions. The same thing my ex-husband used to do when I questioned his decisions. I apologized for the intrusion, heard myself apologizing, left quickly while Linda watched with an expression I couldn't read. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, shaking, hating myself for apologizing, for running, for being exactly the person Linda had counted on me to be. That evening, Marcus texted. Linda had called him, said I'd broken into the house, was making wild accusations, seemed unstable. She was concerned about my mental state, thought maybe the grief was affecting me more severely than anyone realized. Marcus asked if I was okay, suggested maybe talking to someone would help, said Linda had been nothing but gracious managing everything while we grieved, and it wasn't fair to repay that kindness with suspicion. I stared at the text until the screen went dark. Linda was preemptively discrediting me. If I took this to a lawyer now, I'd look like the unstable, grieving daughter, making unfounded accusations against her generous stepmother. She'd outmaneuvered me before I'd even made a move. This was why I avoided conflict. I was terrible at it. Always had been. People like Linda, confident, strategic, shameless, they always won. I lay in bed that night wanting to give up. Let Linda have everything. Move on with my life. Forget the whole thing. Then I remembered Dad's neighbor, Mrs. Martins. Elderly woman lived in the house for 40 years. Loved Dad, brought him soup when he was sick, and Mrs. Martins had a security camera pointed at her driveway. The angle would catch Dad's driveway too. The camera would show what Linda had been loading into moving trucks. I decided to ask. One more piece of evidence before I gave up completely. One more try before I let fear win. Mrs. Martins answered her door in a floral apron, smelling like ginger and garlic. She'd known me since I was 7 years old, used to give me homemade dumplings when I'd walk past her house on the way to school. She took one look at my face and invited me in for tea. I explained the situation carefully, tried not to sound paranoid or unstable. Mrs. Martins listened while pouring oolong into delicate porcelain cups, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she said she'd never liked Linda. Said Linda had shark eyes, cold and calculating. Mrs. Martins had tried to warn Dad once gently, but Dad was lonely after Mom died and Linda made him feel young again. Some warnings people don't want to hear. The security camera footage went back 6 months. Large capacity hard drive, automatic backup. Mrs. Martins pulled it up on her computer while I sat beside her, holding my breath. We found everything. Multiple dates showing Linda and a moving company loading items from the house. Furniture, boxes, bubble-wrapped paintings, the vintage car being towed away on a flatbed. All of this happening weeks before probate was finalized, before Linda legally had authority to touch any estate property. The most damning footage was from 2 weeks ago. Linda and a man I didn't recognize loading paintings into a truck. Mrs. Martins said that was Linda's brother-in-law, Robert. The same Robert Martins who'd bought Dad's car for $12,000 according to the estate documents. Mom's paintings, the ones Linda said were worthless reproductions, being loaded carefully into a truck by someone who clearly knew they had value. Mrs. Martins provided me with copies of everything, said she'd testify in court if needed, told me Dad would be proud of me for fighting back. I cried in her kitchen while she patted my hand and refilled my tea. I spent the next week organizing everything into a case file. County records showing Linda's lies about the house value and estate debts. George's testimony about the watches. Shipping receipts from Linda's study. Security footage of unauthorized removals. I even contacted auction houses with descriptions of Dad's items. Found 2 that had records of Linda selling his belongings. Total value of missing or misappropriated property, approximately $340,000, more than half the estate, gone. I made an appointment with an estate attorney, a woman named Patricia Brennan who specialized in probate disputes. She reviewed my evidence for an hour, asking questions, taking notes, occasionally shaking her head. When she finished, she said I had an excellent case, clear breach of fiduciary duty, possible criminal theft and fraud. We could file a complaint to remove Linda as executor, freeze the estate, and recover the stolen property. Then she told me her retainer was $15,000. Total cost would probably reach $40,000, depending on how hard Linda fought back. I had $38,000 in my retirement account. That was it. My entire financial safety net. Money I'd been slowly building since the divorce, trying to catch up after my ex-husband had cleaned out our joint savings. I asked if I could represent myself. Patricia was kind but honest, possible, but unlikely to succeed. Linda would hire expensive lawyers. They'd bury me in motions and procedural requirements. I'd make mistakes that would cost me the case. So my options were gamble my entire retirement on a legal battle I might lose, or walk away and let Linda keep everything Dad wanted me to have. I went home and stared at my evidence folders for 3 hours. 41 years old, and I was finally seeing the pattern. My whole life had been the same choice, over and over. Let someone take something from me, or fight back and risk losing even more. The bully in 4th grade who stole my art supplies, I never told the teacher because I didn't want to be a tattletale. My college roommate who borrowed my clothes without asking, I never confronted her because I didn't want to seem petty. My ex-husband making all our financial decisions, I never objected because I didn't want to seem controlling. Every time I chose peace over justice, chose avoiding conflict over protecting myself, and every time I lost a little more of who I was supposed to be. Dad used to tell me that courage wasn't the absence of fear. He'd say it when I was learning to paint, when I'd get frustrated and want to quit. Courage is being terrified and doing it anyway, doing it badly even, just doing it. Linda had counted on my cowardice, had probably spotted it at the first family dinner, the way predators recognize prey. She'd stolen from me for 6 months knowing I'd never push back. But this wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about Dad's memory, the life he'd built, the things he specifically wanted his children to have. Linda was erasing him piece by piece, and I was the only one who seemed to care. I emptied my retirement account. $38,000, barely enough for Patricia's retainer and projected costs. If the case went longer than expected, I'd have nothing left. I called Patricia and retained her services. Then I called Marcus. Time to see if my brother would choose truth over comfort. We met at a coffee shop near his office. I brought the evidence folders, laid everything out methodically. Documents, photographs, footage, witness statements. Explained the whole case calmly despite my shaking hands. Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifted in his seat, said the evidence was concerning, but maybe there was an explanation. Linda was Dad's widow. She deserved something for taking care of him. Maybe Dad had promised her these things verbally. Estate law was complicated. I asked if he'd help pay legal costs. Even half would make this survivable for me. Marcus said he couldn't afford it right now. His kids' tuition, the new house, things were tight. Also, he didn't want to be involved in family conflict. Suggested I try working it out with Linda directly. Surely reasonable people could compromise. I stared at my brother across a table littered with evidence of theft and realized he was choosing comfort over truth. He'd rather believe Linda's lies than deal with the ugliness of fighting her. I told him I was filing a complaint tomorrow with or without his support. Marcus left looking annoyed, texted me an hour later saying I was tearing the family apart. Dad would be ashamed of me for attacking his widow. I was letting grief make me vindictive. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried until my eyes were swollen. Then I dried my face, drove to Patricia's office, and signed the retainer agreement. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about the retirement money, $38,000 that had taken me 8 years to save, money that was supposed to protect me when I was old and couldn't teach anymore. Gone now, gambled on a fight I might lose. But if I didn't fight, what did that make me? The woman who let people steal from her because confrontation was scarier than theft? I thought about Dad building my art studio in the basement, how he'd work on it every weekend, teaching me to measure and cut and sand. He'd make me redo things when I rushed them. Said anything worth doing was worth doing right, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. I'd spent 41 years doing things the easy way, avoiding, accommodating, apologizing. Maybe it was time to do something the hard way. Patricia filed the emergency petition 3 days later. Remove Linda as executor. Freeze all estate assets. Require full accounting of every property disposition. Appoint a neutral third-party executor. Court hearing scheduled in 10 days. Linda hired a law firm that probably charged more per hour than I made in a week. The courtroom was exactly as terrifying as I'd imagined. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, Linda sitting across from me in an expensive suit, looking confident and composed. I felt like I was wearing my anxiety like a second skin. Patricia presented our case methodically. County records showing Linda's lies about estate value and debts. Security footage of unauthorized removals. George's testimony about watches he never received. Appraisals showing $340,000 in missing property. Linda's attorney argued she'd acted in good faith to preserve estate value. Everything was documented. Everything was proper. This was just a vindictive daughter attacking a grieving widow. The judge asked Linda directly about specific items. Linda's answers were smooth, practiced. Everything necessary, everything legal, everything for the estate's benefit. Then the judge asked about Mom's paintings. Linda said they were worthless reproductions, donated for tax deduction. Patricia played the security footage. Linda and her brother-in-law loading paintings carefully into a truck. Mrs. Martins's testimony that she'd overheard Linda discussing their value. The judge's expression changed. Next question. Dad's vintage car. Linda said she sold it for $12,000 to pay debts. Patricia presented the auction record showing it sold for $67,000. Bill of sale showed Linda sold it to her brother-in-law Robert for $12,000, who immediately flipped it for $67,000 and kept the difference. The judge stopped looking neutral. 20 minutes later, Linda was removed as executor. A neutral attorney was appointed. Linda was ordered to provide full accounting, return all items in her possession, and show cause why she shouldn't face criminal charges. Linda's face went white. Her attorney requested a recess. The judge denied it. Outside the courtroom, Linda approached me. Her composure was shattered. She was shaking, furious, desperate. Told me I'd destroyed everything. Dad would be ashamed. I heard my voice steady for the first time in 6 months. Told her Dad taught me to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. She'd stolen from his memory, from his children, from everything he'd built. Linda threatened to appeal, drag it out, make it cost me everything. I told her to go ahead. I wasn't backing down anymore. 6 months later, the estate was finally settled. I received my proper inheritance, $300,000 after legal fees. Marcus got the same. He texted, "Thank you." We haven't spoken since. Linda pleaded guilty to avoid trial, probation, restitution, community service. Her real estate license suspended. No jail time, but a criminal record that would follow her forever. I kept thinking I should feel victorious. Justice served, bad guy punished, inheritance recovered. Instead, I felt tired, changed, harder than I used to be. Mom's paintings hang in my apartment now. Dad's landscapes, Mom's portraits. Looking at them, I remember Dad teaching me to paint, how he'd make me redo work I thought was finished, said I was capable of better than good enough. I spent 41 years settling for good enough because fighting for better was too scary. My students noticed the change first. Ms. Rachel enforces rules now, doesn't let kids walk over her. The vice principal asked me to lead the art department. I said yes without the usual self-doubt. Marcus sends Christmas cards with no personal note. We used to be close. That's gone now. Some days I think the fight was worth it. Other days I'm not sure. I visited the house one last time before the new owners moved in. Stood in my childhood bedroom, empty except for memories and dust. The woman who sat here 6 months ago holding Dad's stolen watch. Too afraid to fight back. She's gone. I'm not sure I like who I became in the fight. Harder, more cynical, willing to burn relationships for principles. But I respect myself now. That's new. Dad taught me to paint. Linda taught me to fight. I learned both lessons. The second one just cost more. I locked the door and walked away. Not because it didn't hurt, because I'd learned that doing hard things matters more than avoiding pain. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Can we talk? Old Rachel would have called immediately, apologized for everything, rebuilt the bridge at any cost. I texted back, "When you're ready to apologize, I'm listening." Then I kept walking.